Recording is starting. Great. Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the regular monthly meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board. My name is Cynthia Krass, and I'm currently serving as the chair. I'd like to welcome John Larson Friend as the new staff liaison. This is his first meeting in that role officially, but he's not new to us, so we're happy to have you in this role. Yay. I also, before we get started, just want to mention that this month marks the end of the term for our colleague Christy Triple. I want to acknowledge Christy's excellent service to the town for these past couple of years. You always bring valuable insight and a lot of history to our discussions, and I personally have found it extremely helpful, so I really appreciate that. I also really appreciate your sly sense of humor and your patience and kindness. And I think you have a tone, you help set a tone that's professional and warm at the same time, and you will be missed. And the staff brought in some cookies just as a little celebration. So you should all feel free to help yourself at any time. And as you enjoy the cookie, remember how much we appreciate Christy and how much she'll be missed. But I just want to make it clear, she served her term, and so it's not like she's bailing. So I really appreciate that, and I know everybody else does too. So,
well, and I appreciate working with everyone and getting to know you a little bit better.
Was that a 6-year? How many years?
No, 2, I think, maybe 3.
Our terms are 3, but I think you started in on someone like a term.
I can't even recall, you know, that COVID time was just a big blur. So the concept of time is not there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we're ready to move on to minutes, and I am seeking approval of the regular March meeting minutes by unanimous consent as presented. And hearing no, I do have a question. No. Oh, hearing no objections, the minutes are approved as presented. Andrea taught me that, I think. I don't know, or maybe it was Tisha. Okay, so that brings us, I believe, to public comment. Do we have anybody who's here to make a public comment?
I do not see anyone here to make public comment tonight.
Okay. It says public comment at 6:10. I'm going to close public comment for now, but in case it pops on before what it says in the agenda, I would encourage us to pause and give them an opportunity. And that brings us to regular business, the capital improvement program. So turn it over to either John or to Andrea, Deputy Director.
That's me. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Snyder, Deputy City Administrator. With me, I have Robert Hamoud. He's our Chief Financial Officer.
Nice to meet you.
And we are here to talk about the draft CIP, in particular, the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan. And we're really focusing on transportation projects today. This is a conversation to follow up on the board summit that we held back in February and subsequent conversations we've had on the TIP and CIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan. The agenda for tonight is we'll go over what kind of direction we seek from this board, a little bit reminders and background on the CIP and the CIP process. We're going to give an overview of the draft CIP, and we'll also talk about some of the near term. I'm sorry, that shouldn't say. Park and trail, more like transportation plan investments, so please forgive that typo. And then discussion and an opportunity to discuss, and then we'll talk about next steps. So first I want to say, as we dive into this, you probably noticed in your packet, you didn't actually get draft CIP, right? There was no nice big report, 70 pages long, pulling all of this information together. Instead, you got a bunch of different attachments. Patience and sifting through all of those attachments. The reason why you didn't get one cohesive report is because we don't have one yet. It's still being drafted. And Robert and his team are working on that this week. We'll actually transmit the CIP, complete the whole draft, and transmit it next Monday. And so that's why we just have some of the information. So what was included in your packet tonight and what we're presenting on is not even hot off the presses. It hasn't even been to the presses yet, quite literally. And so thank you for your patience in sifting through all those different documents. So tonight, the feedback that we're looking for from you is continuing that criteria conversation that we started way back in February, looking at the project selection criteria that you helped provide feedback on and helped form. How did we apply those? Do you have feedback on how we applied that? We're given the projects that are in the 6-year CIP, were there any surprises that you saw? Where did you think that we applied some of those criteria correctly or incorrectly? Did we miss something big? And then if we were to use these criteria again, what changes should we consider? So those are some of the questions that we have for you tonight. And before we get there, just again, taking a couple steps back, this is a reminder, the CIP is a planning document. It's not a budget, right? And so you will recall this figure that was at the board summit. We've seen this figure a couple of times. At the top, we look at this 20-year picture, and that long-term vision is really for this group, things like the master mobility plan or other kind of master infrastructure plans, where we look at what's the vision, where do we want to be, what are some of the policies that guide our transportation investments, what are some of the projects we want to work on. And then we use that plan to then decide what goes into the 6-year CIP. So which of those transportation mobility projects that were discussed in the MMP, which of them are we actually going to implement in the next 6 years? And so we have to go through a prioritization process and really figure out what can we do, what can we afford, and apply those criteria. So we are at this stage, that middle box, that green box that you see, the light green box that you see, that's really where we are today. And then we use the CIP, that planning document, to develop the budget. We already have a budget for 23 and 24. And so this will help form that, the CIP will help form the budget and any changes to the budget we need to make for next year, for example, but also subsequent years' budgets. And then finally, once it's budgeted, then we have a funded capital project. And so this group has the ability to kind of add input to all of these different stages of how a project becomes reality. So influence over the MMP, we're talking about the CIP right now. As we talk about the budget, what's in the budget, or form the details of those projects, you'll often get presentations about aspects of a project to decide, better refine the concept of a specific project, right? So there's all these different phases in a project that this group and our other boards and commissions are involved in. We're really just focused on this middle trapezoid, this light green area right now, which is the CIP. So that means that we're going to be talking higher up about these projects. We're not going to be talking, for example, concepts of the projects within the next 6 years. We're not going to be talking about, where's the bus stop going to go in this project or that project? That's not the level of detail that we're here to discuss today. We do have future opportunities to discuss that level of detail. So background. Changes since we did the last CIP. The city updates its TIP, its Transportation Improvement Plan, on an annual basis. Those are usually small, minor updates. We update the CIP every 2 years. And so since the last CIP was adopted, a couple of things have happened. We had the Capital Finance Community Task Force. Your own chair, Crass, was the chair of that task force. And served well on that task force. That group came out with essentially 3 recommendations. One was that they recommended the city do more to invest in infrastructure, including the pursuit of new revenue tools. They also recommended that, or they stated that mobility and transportation were the first priority when it came to capital investments, but that parks and trails and facilities were also very important. There were a few more recommendations they made, but those are kind of that's the top overview for those 3. We also, changes since the last CIP, as you know, I've been talking about these new and improved criteria, project selection criteria to get into the CIP. And previously we had criteria, but it was more check the box, yes or no, does this project address safety? Yes or no, is this okay for the environment or does it damage the environment? And then this year, we've added red, yellow, and green thresholds and gradings, so we can not just say yes or no, but how good is this project when it comes to environmental benefits? How much does this address life safety, et cetera? So we've raised the bar on those criteria and how our projects must meet those criteria. So those are all the changes that we've made since the last CIP, which are influencing the creation of this CIP. So we looked at the criteria, we looked at the recommendations of that Capital Finance Community Task Force, put all these things together to help us draft the new CIP. Any questions so far? Okay, great. So you should recognize these criteria. They are in your packets with more explanations for what defines when a project is, you know, assigned green. What's that threshold? How we define that threshold? What does it mean for community priority to be have a grading of yellow, for example? So there's more explanation and description in your packet. Hopefully you had a chance to revisit that and refresh your memories before this evening. But again, these are the new criteria that we use to apply to the projects. The last criteria, as you'll recall, longstanding commitment. That one is criteria is, I'm going to go ahead and say it, the least defined. You may recall that is a criteria that our city council wanted us to add in to this process, and they still would like to help define that criteria further. So we're going to begin our conversations with city council next month, where they will weigh in more on exactly what this means. They're going to look at a list of projects and tell us which projects meet that criteria. So that's really left up to city council. What we did internally as staff, how we applied these criteria, we had the project managers from across the city and parks and transportation facilities, et cetera. They submitted projects, and those project managers graded the projects, you know, against these criteria. So do they think that it should have been a green and legal mandate or addressing life safety concerns, or is it a red, for example? So the project managers went through, when they submitted their proposals, they went through this grading process. Then Robert and finance staff took a look across the city at those criteria and the grading to ensure that we're consistently applying those criteria, that it's making sense, that it's more even across the city and across different categories of infrastructure. So that's how we use these criteria to help draft and how we applied them. That was our process and help draft the CIP that we have today. So overall, in the CIP, there's a couple of trends that I wanted to make sure you were aware of. One is that overall, in general, we have more funding, more focus on maintenance programs than in the past. So we've heard, and it's actually one of our criteria, repair or maintain existing infrastructure, and we really took that to heart. So you'll be seeing that a lot in the CIP. Also, the draft CIP responds to feedback that we heard from the task force, from our city council, other community members, that we need to make more investments in our infrastructure, while also ensuring that the plan is achievable. So we want it to be realistic, but we also need to do more. And so how do we do those things at the same time? We do that by trying to get more resources to do more work. And so the CIP also anticipates new revenues for transportation, for public safety, especially related facilities, and parks and trails over the next 6 years. And we're going to talk more tonight about new revenues for transportation in a little bit. So transportation specifically, the TIP component of our CIP, Capital Improvement Plan, follows the same theme in that we are emphasizing more on maintenance and infrastructure replacement programs in this TIP than we have in the past. Specifically, as I address a little bit below, you're going to see more on equipment replacement, RFB replacements. RFB is a rapid flashing beacon. I can't remember the first R. Rectangular rapid flashing beacons. None of those round ones. That's not what the R stands for. It stands for rectangular. So We have a lot of these in the city for pedestrian safety, but we haven't had a replacement program. And so we've just kind of been winging it as they need a replacement. We have so many, we need to plan for this. And so we have more of these equipment replacements in the TIP than we've had in the past, especially when it comes to traffic signals and things like that. So that's one area where you'll see in the TIP more emphasis on maintenance and infrastructure replacement. We have 31 transportation projects or programs in the draft. Difference between a project or a program, programs are ongoing. So PMP is a great example of a program. So it's the pavement management program. That's where we do street overlays and just general street maintenance, right? Maybe it's filling potholes or crack seal or things like that. So that's a good example of a program that are more ongoing. A project would be something like Northwest Sammamish non-motorized or pinch point, right? That's a discrete project. It has beginning and end. Once we're done with that project, we all cut a ribbon and ride our bikes happily down the street, and that's about it. So that's the difference, and you'll see those in the TIP. We have more programs, more ongoing maintenance type programs in the TIP than we've had in years past. We also, as I said, are anticipating a sales tax of 0.1% for transportation projects. And that is actually in the assumptions of the TIP. And so that's related to the Transportation Benefit District. The task force, and Chair Crass may recall this, talked about a Transportation Benefit District sales tax. After the task force made their recommendations and concluded their work, the state legislature actually enabled city councils to vote in a sales tax. So this sales tax that we're suggesting, we're recommending, is not subject to public vote. It's something that the council themselves can enact. And that's a really new tool from the state legislature that is just about a year old. And so that's what we're recommending for city council to consider. And there are revenue options within the TIP that assume that city council will pass that sales tax. If city council does not choose to pass that sales tax, then we're going to have to take a look at those projects and which projects will be able to fit the budget without those revenues. Yes.
Earlier, you were talking about exploring new revenue options. Is this the option, or was that referring to other things in addition to that?
Great question. This is the option we're recommending at this time for transportation related projects. So also within the CIP, within the next 6 years, we are wanting to talk to council about other revenue options for other types of infrastructure, like public safety related facilities. We need to build a fire station in North Issaquah, for example. And so we are looking for revenues for how to pay for those facilities. And we're going to have conversations with city council actually over the next month and how we can possibly raise funds for those types of facilities. Later on in the CIP, 2027, 2028, we also anticipate looking at ways to raise funds for parks infrastructure. We've heard a lot from our community about the desire to invest more in our parks and to bring our parks up to a modern standard. And so we'll be looking for different revenue options to help pay for parks. The Capital Finance Community Task Force said that transportation is our #1 priority and that we should be focusing on transportation first. And so that's why we're coming forward with this TIP and the assumptions in the TIP asking city council to approve of this sales tax.
So this is specifically, I know it says for, but it's specifically for transportation.
That's correct. And it has to be because it's related to the TBD. TBD on the slide stands for Transportation Benefit District. The city of Issaquah adopted a Transportation Benefit District a few years ago. We have never adopted any revenues to support that Transportation Benefit District. So this would be, it's specifically a tool allowed by the state for transportation benefit districts. All of the monies levied by the sales tax have to go for transportation improvements.
Can I say, oh, go ahead. I was curious about the Transportation Benefit District. Is that for all of the city of Issaquah? It's not just a
That's
little
correct.
part of it?
That's correct, yeah.
I wanted to be sure about that.
Yeah, other cities, it depends. Some cities do it differently. You can do it for a certain section of the city. When the city of Issaquah adopted this form of the Transportation Benefit District, they chose the city borders to be the borders of the Transportation Benefit District. So it's the
Okay.
entire
So it's-
city for us.
Okay, and so then it will be easier for the council to approve the sales tax.
Yeah, and that means, sales taxes collected across the city can then benefit across the city. One of the reasons why transportation benefit districts, why sales tax is the tool and why the task force had recommended a consideration of a sales tax to fund transportation, is because right, we have a large daytime population, lots of employees, lots of people buy things and pass through Issaquah. Most of them are doing it by using the city streets one way or another, whether they're on a bus, a bike, whether they're walking or driving, they're all using transportation infrastructure to purchase goods. And so that's why the sales tax kind of spreads out those costs a little bit more among transportation system users than say just a property tax, which would only tax our residents. So it spreads out those costs beyond just the residents that people live in.
Does this also anticipate I've seen it in a bunch of different reports, like the downturn that a lot of jurisdictions are facing, especially after 2025?
Yeah,
Yes.
and Robert, you can talk to some of that what we're seeing in retail, sales tax receipts.
Yeah, we actually have about a quarter of the retail sales tax numbers, the first quarter, almost in now, we have 2 months, almost getting 3 months. We're actually not seeing the downturns yet that other areas are, but however, one of the items that we are seeing that's impacting specifically transportation revenues is our real estate excise tax revenues. So anytime you sell a house, there's a percentage that's taxed that goes to the city. That has dropped this year. So the last 3 months, it's down about 50% of what it was this time last year. So real estate's a very volatile market. What we were seeing last year was a lot of strong commercial activity. We're not seeing that strong commercial activity right now. And the local real estate market, residential market is a little bit slower. So we had anticipated a bit of a downturn that already built in our 2-year budget this year that started in 23 and 24. That being said, we fund several transportation projects with that fund, and we also fund about $1 million worth of transportation operations out of that fund. So with that downturn, again, having another revenue source for transportation projects is critical to offset those losses.
So you're describing that real estate excess tax, that goes to a specific bucket that's handled differently than the general fund?
It is, so there's restricted uses to that. Predominantly, the use is going to be transportation.
And just proportionally, I don't need specific numbers, what's the commercial side of that compared to the residential side?
That's a very good question. It depends month by month, it changes. So some months where there might not be any commercial activity, it's a volatile market. So sometimes you'll see like a $10 million building go in a shopping center, piece of parcel. Other months, it'll be slower. We're gonna see more residential than commercial. So it's really hard to say what the balance is. I'd say for the totals for last year, it was probably 50-50.
I want to go back and have a question. So the TBD, I wasn't following the state legislature's act to empower cities to raise tax without vote. Is that inside or outside of the context of a TBD?
It's inside of the context of the TBD. So
So it's not
when
a
we-
broad action, it was specific to this.
that's,
And
yes.
prior to that, that would have taken a vote, even once the TBD was formed.
Prior to that, it was, what was in this, I think it was 0.2%, vote to the people was what we had contemplated in our task force conversation. So this is less, we could still go to the voters for a larger percentage of
see.
sales tax. But what the state legislature enabled was a 0.1% sales tax to be voted by city councils.
So just to elaborate a little bit, for the transportation benefit districts, the city council serving as the TBD for
Right.
district one
Right.
has the ability to, before this passed, to do a car tax fee in the city. they've decided not to do that, obviously. Sound Transit has a very large car traffic. Experience in the city. So that was the only option that the council could do without going to voters. Now, the council can do they can enact a 0.1%, but they can also go back to voters in the future for a 0.2% TBD sales tax as well. But the 0.1%, they do not need to go to voters effective last year.
Great, thank you.
And it's not just for anything, it's really related to the TBD.
Okay. There's suddenly a run on TBDs in the state of Washington. Everyone's forming a TBD.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that, but it is a new tool that I think people are just starting to concentrate.
And does it bump up against some kind of max, or are we not close enough? Isn't there like a state, like?
That's for
absolute
property
cap?
tax.
Oh, it's not for sales
This
tax?
is
There isn't
outside
a
of-
sales tax cap?
There is, but that's part of that. So we don't have an overall sales tax path. This adds on to what the city receives. So we can receive again up to 0.3 with voter approval for the TBD. But there's no absolute maximum of sales tax. There is on property tax though.
So this is new, it's not a renewal,
Correct.
and this is new budget for new purposes, or is there gonna be any sort of like taking stuff out of other budget because this new tax is created, and then for funding it through that?
It's a great question. So we are having this conversation with council. Council may always decide to change things. What we're proposing is, if you looked at past TIPs, if you looked at the many documents attached to this packet, there's so many projects that are unfunded in the out years of the CIP. And there's many projects that are even unfunded within the 6-year plan of the CIP. So what we've done is we've looked at, okay, how are we gonna fund these projects and actually do them? And so what we're talking about for this TBD sales tax, what we're proposing to city council is that this sales tax would be used to help pay for a couple of projects that we have been wanting to do but didn't have revenues to do.
Okay.
And so that includes the Northwest Sammamish non-motorized improvements in our proposal. That includes Squawk Mountain non-motorized improvements. So whether that's sidewalks or bike lanes, that's under study right now and what those might look like. And there's a few other things as well, more in the near term. Is that we're having trouble identifying any other revenue sources, especially given the challenges that Robert just noted with the real estate excise tax decreasing recently.
And also the gas excise tax, we see that the state has been progressively decreasing for years. Because if you think of, okay, you might see the gas price go higher at the pump the past couple of years, but at the same time, people are getting more fuel efficient vehicles, they're getting electric vehicles. So that's actually gradually decreasing that revenue allocation received from the state. The state did enact a law, I think it was last session and the session before, to charge an electric vehicle fee when you register your car every year. The cities do not receive any of that. That goes directly to the state. So we don't receive any portion of that. So that piece is still going. So that's why we're looking for more secure revenue sources. And again, the levers that cities can pull and TBDs can pull for transportation is very limited. So it's either like we talked about, the TBD sales tax that we're proposing, car tax, which we were not doing here in the city of Issaquah, but also Emily and her group and John and the engineering group, they're very aggressive in trying to secure state and local funding. Our mayor's also trying to secure state and local funding for the Infrastructure Act that was passed last year in the federal government to hopefully work with our local elected officials at the state and federal level to secure some of that money for some of our multimodal projects and some of our larger transportation projects. So we're always doing that. So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach to secure revenues.
I do just want to take a pause and make sure that Tom, I tend to forget sometimes our virtual attendees. Tom, did you have any questions?
No questions so far. I'm not sure if my camera, if you can see it, through my camera, I don't see it here. I was trying to figure out. But I'm not no questions. Can you hear me?
There you go. Yeah, okay, there, you're good. Okay, thanks, Tom.
Great. Yeah,
I was just gonna, if anyone's interested, I think I found the right one. The bill that had the TBD, revenue option, Senate Bill 5974 from the 21-22 cycle. I'll look it up.
great. Okay, so moving on. So this, we're asking for feedback from you all today, especially on the criteria, right? And so I wanted to pull out some themes that I saw as we scored these projects. So first, many transportation items scored really high in equity. And that is no small task, because I think we have a pretty high bar and high threshold for how we scored these projects, especially in relation to equity. So the green, or just score high in equity, means that these transportation projects specifically are targeted to correct a historic disparity in services to an underserved population or underrepresented population. And there are many transportation items that, for example, are improvements for ADA improvements, so increased accessibility of the city, which is great. Also, most projects were considered neutral to climate resiliency and environmental benefit. Again, this is a really high bar that we have to score yellow. So if you look at in your packet, there's an attachment that shows criteria scoring, and you'll see the red, yellow, green across the transportation projects. And what to score green, the highest score you can have under environmental benefit and climate resiliency, means that the project is necessary to really correcting Issaquah's impact on climate change, that it provides a critical benefit to the environment, and to score neutral means, in this case, that it's actually still net positive. Red means that it has no impact. So red in this case doesn't mean that it has a negative impact on the environment. Red means it has pretty much no impact. And so, so most projects were considered neutral, at least at the concept level. And so I think that's important to note. Again, we've had a really high bar with how we have scored these projects. And so that was another trend. Projects that scored poorly in climate resiliency and environmental benefit, we did have some that scored red, often scored really high in life safety and legal mandate. So even though, for example, there might be some items that benefit motorized vehicles, that might benefit single occupant vehicle drivers, et cetera, that of course have negative impacts on the environment, were also really important for life safety and ensuring the safety of our roads for motorists, pedestrians, and bicyclists as well. And so, so you'll see that trend, that there are some that we really felt like that life safety impact was really important, and therefore those projects needed to be included in the 6-year plan.
I was just looking, I don't have the scoring sheets with me right now, but the top 3 projects and costs, they were about half of the entire package. So it was the Newport, 4th to 900, and then it was the Newport Way, Maple to Sunset, and it was the pavement management plan. So those 3 were about half the whole thing. What was the climate resiliency score for those?
I am gonna have to look that up. So just a second while I take a look.
To report projects that green. Julian, what was the other?
The pavement management plan?
Pavement management plan. Is, red.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's more of a maintenance environment. That's a program.
Yeah, so that's the streets program. So
Right.
Wait, can you explain the scale again? Red is
Neutral.
better than neutral, and green is like it is not good for climate resiliency?
No. Green, so let me go to that criteria definition, and I'll put that up on the screen so you can see
No, we just got
what
giant.
the scoring looks like.
Tell him she took her screen share off, and just so you know, you got giant on our monitor.
Second, let me pull it up here. So. Okay. Like I said, this should be in your packet. But here we go. So for environmental, climate resiliency or environmental benefit, hopefully everybody can see that. Green
Yeah,
doesn't need to be large, sure, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, great. So, green means the project is required to prevent or correct detrimental impact to vital habitat, ecosystem, natural resources, or the project prevents or corrects Issaquah's contributions to climate change. Yellow, or what we're sometimes calling neutral in this case, means that the project reduces a detrimental impact. So it's required to completely prevent or correct, and this one is it reduces a detrimental impact or provides a benefit to vital habitat, ecosystem, or natural resource. Or the project has some positive effects on Issaquah's contributions to climate change. And then I know there was concern from the environmental board, so that's why this language is in here, even at the potential risk of minor negative benefits to habitat, ecosystem, or natural resources. So sometimes there can be both, positive benefits and even some negative ones depending on the project. So that's how we try to even out that. And then red means that the project will have no environmental impact, no negative environmental impact, or will have negative environment, or will have, I think, some negative environmental impacts that specifically meaning habitat or climate. So that's how the criteria are defined, and that's what we use to apply to these projects.
So, you explain like how the new boards, the one that's expanding basically into another lane, how that one received the green rating on this?
Yeah, Emily, can you shed light on that?
I can.
Can you I want to make sure that your voice is picked up on the mic.
Certainly.
Thanks.
So I think when staff reviews those two projects, there are a few things to keep in mind. Adding non-motorized mobility features, so the ability to maybe take some vehicular traffic off the roadway in the future, plus significant stormwater management and treatment facilities, which will improve, runoff as it heads to creeks and lakes. So those are the two significant factors that I think weigh into their decision making on how they rated those projects. Or maybe another road project doesn't include quite the same non-motorized mobility aspects, or may not have the stormwater treatment as part of it.
And I think for that project, it was really especially the stormwater treatment, given the existing conditions
Yes,
of how that stormwater, I'm just gonna say, isn't
at all.
managed
Yeah.
at all, versus the new project is just going to improve that so much more.
And the TR 22 project, the SR 900 to 54th and Newport, does include a bike lane, so does include a bi-directional bike lane.
I'm not so doubtful about that one, that's a 900 to 54, I'm just doubtful about one that's adding another vehicle lane, to a pretty large extent of Newport Way.
Maple to Sunset.
Yeah,
We were talking
maybe
about.
Sunset, basically. Just.
But
Not
that
convinced,
probably
not
has
convinced
stormwater
it's fully
treatment
green.
too, right?
Yeah, I
That
think
one would probably have stormwater treatment.
That
Maple to Newport Lake.
that one has very significant stormwater treatment, above and beyond what's there today. The other thing to keep in mind, there's tons of aspects of these projects, and The criteria is not so scientific, right? That everyone is going to apply it in exactly the same way. We feel good about the argument that we could make to have rated it the way that it is. Another thing to keep in mind on that particular project is that road needs some additional traffic control. It needs to facilitate bus movements better. So there are new features that will allow roundabouts, for example, and traffic signals, and hopefully better access for buses. So.
But all of that said, that's why we're here tonight, is asking that question of, do you feel like we applied the criteria well? Do you feel like there are changes that you would prefer we make in how we apply those criteria? So as we have this conversation, if there's recommendations that you have, then we want to hear them. Okay, so let me attempt to go back here and great. Go back to the presentation.
And just a side note, the Maple to Sunset does include multi-use bike path, bike lane sidewalk. So there is a pedestrian component to that.
Yeah.
Non-motorized component.
Scores high in life safety.
Okay, so. That's good. Just wanted to go over some of the very near-term, transportation investments. So the TIP or CIP covers 6 years. What we often do within the, TIP and CIP is we try to plan out, to a greater detail the first couple of years of the plan, because as we get farther into the future becomes harder to predict, right? And so what we're really looking at for this TIP is making sure that the projects in 24, 25, and 26 all have assigned funding to them. And so, and that we can easily continue to budget for these projects. So I wanted to review those near-term projects. There's too many projects in the TIP to go over all of them today. And the intent is not to go over them in detail. In your packet, there were project summaries. So if you have questions specific to a certain project, then I invite you to look at your packet materials. But just to give you an overview of what types of projects are included in the next couple of years, that ADA improvement program, these are all the programs or kind of ongoing type of projects or programs that you'll find in the TIP. So it's ADA improvements, pavement management, concrete management, which includes sidewalks, gutters, things like that. Strategic small capital projects, it's more of an ongoing program that we try to have funds for every year. Signal detection replacement program, signal cabinet replacement program, and the RRFB replacement program. So you're also going to be seeing in this TIP more projects related to the ITS project, that intelligent transportation systems, smart signals, et cetera. We're just starting to put some of these things into the TIP, which we'll see more on the next slide, I think. So also for projects over the next couple of years, this covers multimodal projects. So we have the Newport SR 912 bike and ped improvements. We talked a little bit about the Squaw Mountain multimodal improvements, East Sunset Way pedestrian crossing improvements. We also have public electric vehicle charging stations in this TIP, and then some of the ITS type of upgrades, the dynamic messaging sign replacement, and ITS camera upgrades. And then we have some of these projects that should seem a little bit familiar to you, that Black Nugget Wall, rated really high on life safety. Then we have the Sunset Way landslide repair, Northwest Gilman Bridge improvements, Newport SR 900 to 54th, which we just talked about, Newport Maple to Sunset, and Northwest Juniper Street improvements. Those are some of the projects that we did. So next steps in this process, you will recall we started back in February of looking at those criteria and refining those criteria together, not just with this group, but also with our equity board, with the park board, with the environmental board. Now we're in this bold and black phase here, which is getting board feedback and how the draft CIP meets those criteria. And next, we're gonna take that feedback to the council committees. We have a number of council committees and each have assigned sections of this CIP that they're going to be reviewing. The transportation projects will go on to the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee, for example. And they will be able to dive more deeply on their section of the CIP they're reviewing. And then we take it to not a COW, but that stands for Committee of the Whole. It's Committee of the Whole Council to discuss the entire CIP altogether. And then we'll be asking for council adoption, hopefully before July 1st. That's where we're headed. Any questions on where we are in this process or next steps? Okay, so when we ask for the feedback and direction needed tonight, this feedback, I think we have a couple of options on how to capture this feedback. I will, of course, take copious amounts of notes on what you say, and would be happy to translate that back to the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee and include that in my materials and presentations to the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. If this group feels very strongly that you want to write a letter to the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee with your feedback and communicate with them in that way, you don't want me to be your mouthpiece, but you would rather communicate more directly to them, then that's another option for you and how to provide feedback to the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. So that's something you can think about as you consider the next few questions, which are generally, how did we do in applying these criteria? Were there big surprises? Did we miss something big? Should we have applied these criteria differently? What changes in the future should we consider to the criteria or how we apply them? Thank you.
Well, I'm looking around to see who might want to be jumping. You go ahead, Mike.
I mean, I always comment, so. I think the thing that kind of stands out, I'm really just jumping to the second question, is it seems like, and I think we talked about this in February, that some of these just are gonna have a higher priority. Even the criteria, right, are gonna have a higher priority than others. And so it's sort of like without waiting, I'm kind of curious, like, looking at the colors, right? What does that actually, what's that decision process? And does this turn into an exercise of, yeah, that looks right, okay. Or is there something more to like, well, we understand that life safety and legal mandate is the top priority. So if it's not, if it's green there, we're gonna ignore the rest. But if it's not green there, then we're gonna consider the rest. I guess it's just more like, what, is there a process behind that? And if not, should there be? Maybe not, but.
Yeah, it's a great question and it's tough, right? Because we chose not to assign weighting to each of these criteria because there's just different circumstances that come up. So even things that rank really high in life safety, it can depend on what year life safety comes into consideration. We can talk about the Black Nugget Wall. If 5 years ago, this year, it's not a life safety concern. In a couple of years, it's gonna start to be a life safety concern if we don't do anything. And so it's an art. It's definitely an art in how to apply these things. If we assigned weighting to them and tried to make it a bit more scientific or mathematical, the concern is that we would lose something. So we use the criterion scoring as a starting point. So we did assign number values to the projects. So 1, 2, and 3 based off of the color. And then we looked at total scores and said, okay, what does this give us? And do we need to consider this further given things like how significant of a life safety issue is this? Does it in fact trump everything? Not all life safety issues will, not every year, right? So we kind of need to look through those things. And so we use those numbers as final scores as a guiding point to then interpret further and to really understand, okay, what are the criteria telling us? And in this particular case, does it outweigh, given the very particular circumstances of a project? So it is, how we used it was more of an art and trying to apply it, which is one of the reasons why we're asking for feedback and determining what did we miss?
Are you looking at it, somehow weighted for cost, like the return on your investment that you're getting in each of these scores?
Yeah, we definitely looked at cost in terms of what can we afford and how does that compare against other projects? So, and other criteria. So if there's a really expensive project that maybe, it's hard to measure return on investment for some of these projects. When you talk about community value and quality of life. And so that's when we look at, okay, cost versus how high of a priority is this in the community? Is it part of lots of master plans? Have we heard a big outcry from the community that we really need to be doing this thing? So we do look at these criteria in relation to each other to determine what should be prioritized within the next 6 years.
So return on investment is a good question, because when I look at like the programs, I think we set that up as part of the intention of we're maintaining that investment, we're contributing to that investment, because you build a road, you build infrastructure, you build sidewalks, trees are gonna come up, you're gonna have trippers. Pavement's gonna go after a few years. And so to maintain that investment, to get a higher return on the investment, that's why we think the programs are critical. So again, we're not weighting anything, like Andrea said, we're not weighting anything more than the others, but if we have a finite amount of money and we're looking at which projects, the maintenance projects actually rise, I think, a little bit higher at times, at least maintaining a level of that, because once your pavement condition goes down, it's hard to get back up. Once your sidewalks go or cracked, it's hard to get back up if you're not maintaining it. You have to totally replace it, and it becomes more costly at the time. So, again, there's no waiting, but if you're looking at return on investment, I think the programs, the ongoing programs are very high with that.
I have a couple, I have a question and just a couple small comments, but, was there anything that surprised you after applying the criteria?
Same question.
Okay, and I guess and I'll just say, the reason I asked the question is I'm just gonna put it out there. I think this is really a terrific process, and I really appreciate how this process kind of, this was like daylighted a little bit more, and I feel like we were pretty engaged from an early stage and had a lot of input. But it also, we're not supposed to like get into the projects themselves, and, it's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to make sense of as members that serve on a volunteer board that meet, monthly. And so for us to be able to give like really valuable feedback, it's like, we gotta really live with this stuff to see the, and so I think the reason I'm kind of asking the question is like, it's a lot to take in and synthesize and try to come back. And I'm not saying that, I'm not saying, I'm gonna keep trying, keep bringing this stuff to us, because I think we're gonna get better and better at like handling that volume, but it is really hard for me personally, and I'm not gonna speak for other people, but just, it's a lot to take in and then try to synthesize and come up with an important, unless I've got a particular beef with, you've just gotta move this, project or whatever, but, just overall, and I feel slightly ill-equipped to do that, but I want you to keep on asking. But that's kind of led me to the question of like, what surprised you? Like what, and I did compare like the TIP from last year and the TIP, just like to see what maybe, I'll see a few things just moved around. There wasn't, except for the ITS and some of the other things that you mentioned, there were not many things that came off. And so that's kind of what I was just wondering, like, what surprised you all? And maybe that question is for Emily as well, or John. Is John still with us? Yeah. John, having so much history on this.
Yeah, I would say what surprised me is I just stood back and I looked at the criteria and the projects, at the equity scores, for example, and the environmental scores. That was a bit surprising to me. I thought we'd get more green, and then I realized that we just set the bar really high to get it to be green. And so I'll use this example. because I think it's a good one. It doesn't have to do with transportation, it has to do with parks. So the pool roof. So the pool roof, we have a project in there to, maintain that roof and, it scores, I think, yellow in equity. And the reason for that is because to score green in equity, our standard that we've set for ourselves is that it has to correct a historical disparity. And, that's a really high bar. When we look at the users of the pool and who stands to lose the most, who will be most impacted if we do not maintain the pool? If we completely ignored the pool, if we allowed that roof to leak and then had to close the pool, who's gonna lose out the most? It's gonna be folks who can't afford a membership at a private pool, whether it's a country club or to build their own pool in their backyard or whatever that looks like. It's the folks who can't afford that. And so we could say that the pool benefits, on the one hand, the pool benefits everyone. So is that high equity? But it doesn't actually, specifically respond to a historic disparity, necessarily replacing the roof. So some of these criteria were hard to apply, and that's one of the reasons why we're asking for feedback. But I do think, as we step back, I think we put a really high bar for ourselves. And so we look at these things, we think we do a lot of good work, we are trying to protect the public assets, we're trying to make investments that serve many people in our community, regardless of what your socioeconomic status is, but we're grading ourselves pretty hard, I think. And so that surprised me. I look forward to that conversation at the equity board, for example. Similar with the environmental board, I look forward to those conversations because we've tweaked those criteria a lot in this CIP process. But in terms of transportation surprises, I think it's been hard for us to apply the environmental criteria to transportation projects because there's a lot into it. You could have a project that includes more bicycle infrastructure, critical connections, transit connections, but it includes another lane. It needs more concrete. Well, concrete's produced in a really unsustainable way. There's a lot of energy that's required to produce concrete. It's hard to balance all of these things in a concise way. I mean, this is, graduate research thesis stuff on environmental impact. And we're trying to do it in 6 weeks to come up with a CIP. And so I think it's tough. And that's why, we grapple with how we apply these criteria. And again, that's why we're looking for feedback is, are we thinking about this in the right way? So, and it's tough to weigh environmental benefits and some of the impacts.
Right, and there's these indirect benefits, like how many people are gonna then take the bus now that the bus can move down Newport way faster and doesn't get stuck in the traffic?
Yeah, and how many people today versus 15 years from now, right?
Right.
Because the world's gonna change.
It won't be moving down Newport Way much longer.
Oh,
That's true.
right.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, as an example. So I think it was challenging, and I think we've set the bar really high for ourselves. So when we look at all these scores, we want to see a lot of green, but I think seeing yellow is probably pretty okay considering how high the bar is. I think it also helps us have different lenses and looking at these projects at different times in that process, from conception and vision and master plan to now we're making it more real, putting in the CIP. Now we're really designing the project, getting it budgeted, et cetera. So it just provides a good opportunity for us to reflect on each of these projects.
What does for visioning projects, I mean, there's only one, we're not asking about specific projects, but for the visioning stuff, particularly for Gilman Boulevard, what were those scored? Because we don't really know how they're gonna be ending up with their vision. Is it just based on the scope of work, like safety improvements, focused on safety improvements and development standards, or how is it scored through there?
Let me attempt to pull it up here.
Oh, yeah, is that the only one that's just meh all across the board?
Yeah, yeah. Is it just all mutually rated?
So, I'm sorry, which project did you just ask about?
I was asking about the Gilman Boulevard improvements. I already have it up, the service was slow.
Okay,
But
I'm trying to find what number.
It's 16.
16, there it is. Okay, thank you. Let me try to make this a little bit bigger here. So if you can see my cursor here, Gilman Boulevard improvements. Have to scroll a little bit. So it is all yellow across the criteria. Does that answer your question?
yeah, I was saying I already have it on here, but I was just wondering like, how we're able to determine, or how you were able to determine it was yellow without knowing like,
Because it's a concept.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good question. I can attempt to answer it unless Emily or John Mortensen want to address that question.
No, John is unavailable.
Oh, John's available.
So what I would say is this isn't one that I talked to staff at length about. I certainly went through every little cell and we had quite a bit of exchange as I kind of contested a few or asked some clarifying questions. And we made modifications. This is not one that I spent much time on. And I think precisely for the reason that you've stated, that it's conceptual at this point. So you're right, you pointed out something that is challenging about this system. It's how do you rate a project where so much is unknown, right? And so I think this project manager probably stepped back and looked at what is the process we're gonna undertake to do this scope of work, the visioning exercise as they think about that equity. What are we anticipating there might be opportunities for climate resiliency that we could conceptualize in this project. But I think it was difficult to lean green or lean red because so much of it is unknown at this point in time. I think that you've absolutely pointed out as something that's a bigger challenge with this system, is writing those strategic plans, vision, really not yet capital, right?
Was it obliged to be in the capital budget just for the visioning process?
Yeah, and this one dates back to the central Issaquah plan as early as 2013. And part of it was a goal of more livable, sustainable, and balanced mixed-use area as part of that central Issaquah plan. So again, concepts that they've got capital attached to it. I mean, it's a great area because it's not a specific project, just like the programs. We have items in there that will lead to a capital project or part of that concept. And this is one. Here's a street. We're going to have improvements. We're not sure what they are yet, but we're at least identifying them and putting them there as we go forward. And this one was identified in 2018 specifically. Going forward from there, what is it going to look like? There's going to be a project attached to making sure it's not lost in the process. So it's already been identified, maybe not the actual construction, what it's going to be, but it's in the project, it's in the CIP. To make sure that it doesn't get lost, for example, it doesn't show up 5 years later, we're ready to build, and then we see it anymore, for example. And that's a challenge too that we have. We have a lot of strategic plans and utilities, we have system plans. We have parks, we have this park strategic plan, for example, and making sure we're capturing those items, even if they're concepts, in these documents, as are recommendations for projects or improvements.
And often the design is, for a big project like this, is so expensive in itself. It is a capital expense because it's a really big project and it's gonna take a long time, lots of external expertise, lots of public involvement to shape it.
Can I ask more about I guess, like, one of the questions was like, what surprised you or what did you miss? I just wasn't clear. I should say, like, I So the February meeting, there was the hybrid option, so I wasn't able to be at that. Last meeting I couldn't be at either, so I'm just like feeling like I'm coming in very new to this process, even though it's been like ongoing for a few months.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I feel like you should probably give more weight to like the other members' feedback, because they've had longer time is like steep in this, but there was like a long-term project category.
Yeah.
And that's not on here, and it sounded like there was some discussion like among council or something that made it so that that's not one of the categories, because they wanted to talk about that more, or like define it better or something like that. And so I guess that's my like, oh, curious why that's not on there, other than I guess they want more definition, but that's kind of my thought with this is like, and I don't know if it would, and there's no weighting of these, but like, I don't know if I would weigh it as equally as the others, but like if something has just been on like CIPs for 20 years and they're just like kicking the can, I feel like that should be like, at least like have an asterisk by that project or something.
Yeah, it's a great, so let's talk about those criteria, because we received a lot of really interesting feedback at the board summit that I think you should just be aware of, because so when we had this conversation with council in January about the criteria and asked for their comments, they said, we really don't, what we're concerned about is in this process of redoing criteria and taking another critical eye at what's been in the CIP, we don't want to lose some longstanding commitments that we feel like we've made. We've heard from the community over and over again that something might be a priority, for example, our council feels like they've made a commitment to do a project, and we don't want that to get lost in the shuffle. And so we think that there's something to say about keeping promises that we make as a city council. And we tried to ask them, okay, well, what does that mean then? Is it something that's been in the past CIP? Do you want that to move forward? And they said, well, maybe not necessarily. And so they struggled with it. They wanted to show, they didn't want to break promises they feel like they've made to the community, but at the same time, they really struggled with how to define it. And they landed in a spot of saying, we know it when we see it. And so show us a list of things. Well, so they said, show us a list of projects, and we're gonna talk about that, and we're gonna debate about that in a public, open way. But it's hard for us to otherwise define it so that you can fold it into this greater process. I think finance has done the best job that they can in trying to address it. But when we go to council and have this conversation, there might be a few surprises that we learn. So that's how much council is gonna define it. We talked to the boards about this at the summit in February, and most of the boards struggled with it and said, well, what is that? And how are we supposed to provide comment on that? And we even had comments from boards that we passed on to council and will be continuing to pass on to council of, well, this doesn't seem very transparent. There's a long-standing commitment, but we are not gonna really define that. There might be some equity concerns in that, for example. So we heard feedback from the boards that this is a little too squishy. This should be better defined. And we're concerned with how longstanding commitments may outweigh other criteria, or other goals that we have. And so I'm happy to pass that on to council. Otherwise, it's been hard for us to work with it since council still needs to define it and work through this for us.
My 2 cents of that is like, I think it should be left to council to discuss it, particularly just in the public view. I don't think it's, especially for those equity concerns and also for the environmental concerns as well, and how thinking on transportation has changed over even the past 20, 30 years away from these larger projects. I mean, the city was considering 20 years ago to put a 4-lane bypass up in the middle of the Tiger Mountain forest. And so it's like, I think that stuff should be just thrown out the trash sometimes. And so, yeah, I think it should be left to council and their meetings to decide what is a good, like a longstanding commitment that still fits within today's values.
You bring up a very good point, because I believe that, like the climate action plan, that's something that It's not even new to the city, it's a new concept within 2 to 3 years of the city. So again, we're actually applying that as part of one of the criteria for the first time ever, and actually having sustainability projects for the first time ever in our CIP. So yes, this is a completely problem. And a lot of our projects are involved. Yeah.
Go for it.
I've been very quiet.
I know. It's coming
But
around
the
me.
one thing I will speak up on, because I really feel that's important for my generation, because I'm a lifelong resident of Issaquah. Longstanding commitments. I got home from the United States Army in 1997. They were talking about putting in a light for Providence Point. When did that light go in? It's been about 3 years ago, I think.
Yes.
3 or 4, it's just before the pandemic. Long-standing commitment. Many council members promised in their, promised, you like me, I'm gonna get that done for you. Didn't get done. No, no. When I got home, even before I left, they talked about the big thing for us here in Issaquah is looking at, I hope this will make sense, looking at the queuing. When you queue, you've got 3 major roads that queue into one. How many years have you seen that done? We've never been able to fix that. There's people who are not in the city, but call Issaquah home, that have to face that every morning when they're coming in on the Hobart to get to the long-standing commitment. I think that the taxpayers and the citizens who see that, that is a really high priority. And when the council members stand and say, I'm gonna make that change when I get elected, and then it doesn't get done. So I think that that's a really, really important thing. When I looked at that chart and I saw it at home, there's more yellow than there's anything else. There's not a whole bunch of green, and there's not a lot of red, but there's a lot of yellow. So that tells me that the yellow is what we make our decisions on. If it's a lot of yellow, making our decisions on that yellow. You mentioned that, Edgar, earlier. And I think that this tab really needs to be dig into that area to help with those decisions. We're not experts. But we can sure talk about that. This citizen right here can talk about long-standing commitments because I've seen it through my whole life and the changes to this wonderful valley that we call home. Anyway, for copies of this sermon, you can write to 72 members of the second class envelope. I just think this is what makes the tab so very important. Of course, I felt that when I was on the cemetery board too, but long-standing commitment is extremely important in my eyes because of the people I have known my whole life and how they stand wherever they are located in this wonderful valley, and that's important as well. That's my 2 cents for right now.
Micah, then looks like Eric has her hand. Go ahead, Micah.
Yeah, I think that longstanding commitments also adds weight to the decisions that are made and the priorities that are set. Because if we don't value longstanding commitments, then in some way at least, saying this is a priority, saying we've evaluated it for something years down the road and then just changing, then it just sort of becomes a meaningless process to, especially you get less and less meaning the further out you're looking. And it's like, okay, well, let's just look at the 2 years spending and ignore the next 6 because we're not valuing longstanding commitments. I mean, I hear your point, Julian, and I certainly knew about, we should reevaluate. I agree about reevaluating. I think that reevaluating and valuing longstanding commitments can live together.
Erica, did you have something on this?
Yeah, well, it's like what Dave was saying, made me think about where if there is so much yellow on this, and if we're not weighing these categories. I feel like in that like neutral space, like there's just kind of almost a natural desire to still try and like weigh things anyways, and like I think that's what we're all talking about and where that long-term commitment comes into play. I also feel like I should amend my previous point about, like asking about the long-term commitment where just because something has been like was initially put on a CIP 20 years ago, let's say this foreman situation, like having an asterisk there doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, and therefore we should do it since it's been on. It's just like, we should, like, I guess it gives it an opportunity to like be revisited and then, yeah, strike that from a future plan or something like that, I guess. If it's, I don't know. I guess now I see why council did it. Because it's squishy still, but.
I mean, I think like the longstanding, oh, go ahead.
Oh, keep going. That's fine. Oh.
I guess the longstanding commitments, issues, like a lot of the projects that have been promised are some of the larger projects that take up more CIP, obviously. And I think because of that, it does warrant the evaluation of like where the people of Issaquah come to think about it. It doesn't mean that it's supported anymore. Like, I don't think my path is anywhere near supported anymore. And several other projects. And so I think that reevaluation is very important for these larger projects because of the larger budgets that come attached. So.
Sure, what were you saying?
I was just going on a different bent. I realize that our resources are very limited here in the city. And, we would wish to be able to do all of these infrastructure projects, but we don't really have the dollars to do it. So the way I'm seeing it is the way the staff put together this priority was really a good first step. And the fact that, anything that's green, because I'm a safety person, anything that's green under life safety and legal mandate probably comes up as a higher priority overall. And in my perspective, I'm thinking those are the projects that are gonna be chosen more likely. And, there's all these, I wish, we could fix, what's that, South Sammamish Road or something, the residents that, the code on by 90 would really want that road. But then there's all these other issues that, are safety issues and maintenance issues. And, the city should be taking care of those first. And because if you don't take care of those, then you'll have problems later. But it would be great if, the city would get tons and tons of dollars so we could do more. But the problem is there really isn't the dollars, and there never was 30 years ago either. So we're just kind of stuck choosing. We're probably going to end up focusing on, the life safety and the legal mandate and maintaining what we already have. And that happens all across the state. It's not just the city of Issaquah. So that's my thought.
I was gonna say, very, very true. And I think in a lot of ways, cities playing catch up for decades, right? But we're new team, more sophisticated, the staff, I see them constantly going after grant funding and being successful. I mean, that wasn't done as much many years ago, or the opportunities didn't exist. Yeah, and so I think that there's a lot more resources now, and then looking at the transportation benefit district, I think the planning is really thoughtful, and I also know it's really important to have those projects on the CIP in case there is an opportunity that comes. If it's not, it'll never happen.
Correct.
And so, yes, those long-standing projects might be big dollar amounts, but there might be, like a federal infrastructure package that comes down that funds it. Doesn't mean it's less important. We should, like, observing the Providence Point signal, I mean, that was challenging, because for years and years, people waited, and then they needed to stand up and say, this is a real safety issue for us. And fortunately, the project was able to get done, but it's, so I appreciate seeing where the CIP is and this thoughtful process and trying to navigate all of those nuances of where we're at. And I think I also appreciate, this is just the start. It's the first time the city's doing this, and it'll evolve.
I was gonna ask, is there a way, so like you mentioned that this is an art, not a science. Is there a way, are there best practices either within like your fields, like insurance planning, et cetera, or are other cities doing like things that eliminate the squish? I don't know how to describe it. Turn it from art into a science, or are we the ones that are supposed to be helping to like further refine out squish, or what?
Yeah, well, I'm open, we are very open to suggestion on how to apply the criteria differently. When we started this process, we looked at other cities, what criteria are they using, how are they using them? So we looked at our peer cities, and we found that there isn't a lot of science to this process. It is more of an art, because there are so many, the projects differ. There's so many different circumstances to take into account. One of the things that depending on the city, they can try to spread the peanut butter out evenly among all asset categories. Some cities try to focus on their transportation projects, which is what we're doing in this CIP, because we've received community feedback that that's what we should do. And so every city is a little different in terms of what their priorities are. Every project is a little different, that somewhat defies the math and the science aspect of it. So we haven't seen any city that does it in a more scientific way to reduce the art or the squishiness behind the process.
I don't think it needs exact science, because it is CIP, there's no money amounts attached. I mean, real money amounts attached to the existing budget that has that, so. And then that's, at that point, it's a council decision to include money in there.
So were you finished?
Yeah.
Oh, I have a couple things I wanted to say. I did make a note earlier, and I forgot to say this, that I actually wanted to make a comment. I was really happy to see the ITS projects in there. That was something that was new this year. We spent a lot of time. So I was really happy to see those in there. I think that this process is, I think as far as like, where we want to go from here, what kind of feedback, I think what you're hearing is, you're not hearing anything, and you guys chime in if we just haven't gotten that point, but not hearing a lot of, that a lot has been missed, or that there's a lot of, I'm not hearing anybody like, oh, I mean, there was, you brought up a good point, and I hope that you felt like that was kind of addressed. It was sort of squishy, and,
I still would want to go back to yellow, but.
yeah, but I don't feel like collectively we have any, and I'm not feeling the need for a letter. I think that, to me, the feedback here is, this is all pretty complex. Seems like you've done a pretty good job. We're all still learning. I don't think we have any, you really missed this or that, or wish you'd included this. I think that the only thing I can think of that might be useful in the future, and have lots of time to think about this, is I almost wonder if it might have been more, you're kind of looking for, where are the differences? Like, is there any really meaningful difference in what you came up with, what he might have come up with. And maybe if there's some way to dumb it down and do an exercise where we get to like actually do that scoring as a thought exercise, because it might just expose something that we just haven't quite, there's just not, we just haven't gotten to that level. But if we have the opportunity, that might frighten the administration, because you guys are the experts and you know, the professionals, and we certainly respect your professionalism. But what I'm getting at is what we're looking for is that next level where we have enough familiarity that we can kind of start disagreeing. And I don't think we're to that level where we even have enough understanding, or like, we just haven't thought about it long enough to come up with, I don't know, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would be a little bit concerned about even doing a mock scoring exercise. We have a tendency to dive into just the littlest thing and turn it into like a hour-long conversation. Unless we want to do like a multi-day meeting, there, I just see no chance of us not starting to debate, right? Is this yellow or green? And I think the point I was hearing from the city was there is an element of this is an art. And so we maybe should actually try and not focus too much on the specific scoring, but look more at the result of the scoring.
I think it might be good to maybe do it like for larger projects, because what I was talking about was like the largest, most expensive project in the package. And so I think it would be useful. We don't have to do it for all of them, obviously, but like the 3 largest projects are half the package.
But without knowing the full thought process and discussion for the other ones, we don't have a basis of reference to actually make that decision whether that should be yellow or green.
I think, we're not gonna solve it right now, but what I do think is that what you're hearing is, I do not disagree with you, and I think that's what makes this sort of fun, is we do get in pretty deep in. But I think what I'm saying is, I would like to find some way to facilitate the next level of just really us really, getting, so familiar, not to debate every nuance, but that we can come up with, I feel like maybe more meaningful, like I mean, it's just, there's a lot at stake here. And it's hard. I mean, you guys have struggled with it, and, you know, it's important to trot it out to the community. I do also think looking at the list and seeing like, how does that shake out with what you might have thought? That's a good indicator whether your process was good, is like these projects look right. I was just merely suggesting that, if there's some way to facilitate some, like, kind of a deeper level of just wrestling with the hard things and really identifying what they are. And it looks like Jerry
Well,
and then Dave.
I just had a bit of an idea, you know, maybe, since the project managers evaluate the scoring for their projects. So there's a project manager assigned to each project, right? And they come up with a scoring. So maybe if, you know, we got an explanation from one of the project managers, how they chose some of the scorings, and maybe the scoring of some of the bigger projects that you were talking about doing.
I think that can get really weighted down really quickly, and I want to go back to Dave, but I just want to say, again, we're not going to solve it now. I'm just trying to think about how to facilitate something, a more meaningful community feedback. And one thing that might be helpful is if you guys actually found your disagreement points and you said, all right, you know, we were pretty on the same page about these 17 projects or this 17 scoring, but we really wrestled with these. And we think maybe that's a great place to bring community feedback. Like, what do you guys think? These were assumptions. These were, you know, these smart people disagreed. Like, maybe that is something we could go deeper on. I don't know. I am struggling because this is so important. And, you know, I guess you worry that if you didn't really get it all, miss something big. And it goes to the next, you know, I know there's many parts to that trapezoid that are below us here, but I'm just, yeah. Anyway, Dave, you had something you wanted to say?
So I want to answer at 7:33. So I want to answer one of those questions. Look at that 1A up there. Were there any surprises for what is in the 6-year plan? There was a huge surprise. It was called a pandemic. And it affected the traffic in Issaquah for over 2 years. We would pull out on, just go down to Front Street. And you go, oh God, I can make an immediate left turn. And I couldn't do that at any other time. It totally affected the traffic. It affected commercial transportation. We lost a lot of bus drivers. A lot of routes went away. That was huge. Is it possible that that could happen again? 1918 it happened, right? Wasn't as significant as it was to us this time. But that's one thing we can capture right now. The pandemic had a significant impact on how things changed. And we were trying to apply criteria that wasn't set for a pandemic, that was set for reality. Hence, there's got to be a way to look at it if we ever have a pandemic again. God forbid we never have a pandemic again. But if we do, is it going to change? Probably a lot. The park and ride, you guys don't know this, I know this, the park and ride was full to capacity every day. As 3 months into the pandemic, you could park on the first, second, third, for sure, fourth floor all day. You could park your car there for a week and nobody would know. That's a huge answer to that question. Were there any surprises? Yes, the pandemic. Were the criteria applying correctly? I think so, but maybe not so much during that time frame as we galloped along, because we've just really gotten out of the pandemic to come back to reality, right? I would say the pandemic was a huge thing that we have to plan for in the future. And I would very much like to go forward now that it's 7:35, and answer your question 1B. Were the criteria applied correctly, or did we miss something big? The only thing big I think you missed was we didn't know the parameters around what the pandemic was going to do to us. And it made a major change. And now life is getting back to somewhat normal, which means those priorities that are driving those projects and programs are just as important as they were. But we took a vacation for 3 years and didn't have to worry about it. And probably didn't miss a lot. That's what I throw in there. I'm just trying to answer your questions before we run out.
Just a side note about that, especially when we talk about facilities, but also when we talk about transportation. The pandemic has had now a semi-permanent effect on people's travel behaviors, people's shopping behaviors, and also commuting patterns. So, and it's yet to be determined, but that's had an impact on some of what we're thinking about.
And people working, their whole working changed. And it changed everything, not just in Issaquah, everywhere. And that was a huge surprise as we sit here today. I'm going to shut up.
But we certainly talked internally about that quite a bit, and its impact on our guy.
I would like to kind of just check in. I don't know what kind of feedback you were expecting. I don't know if you got answers to the questions that you were seeking. You certainly didn't blow up your your CIP and your criteria. So that's good. That's good.
Yeah, so let me just summarize so I can make sure that I am passing on the right comments to city council. So if I say something that you feel is not reflective of the group, or that I shouldn't be passing on to city council, let me know. I heard one request to change SR 954th project for environmental impact to yellow instead of green.
No, the Maple to Sunset one.
Maple to Sunset. Okay, thank you.
Hold on, I'm gonna stop you there real quick. Are we feeling like that's a one person on the board, or are we all kind of nodding?
I'm not nodding to that.
Okay,
Not either.
so it's a minority voice.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't mean to be, I mean, you may have your minority voice. I just wanted to make sure that, I just think that context is important. A
Okay,
strong minority voice.
okay, great.
I'm
And,
kind of neutral. He's not alone, but I'm,
okay, what I heard from this group was a lot of conversation on the longstanding commitment criteria and how important that is. And I heard some differences, but I think I can convey them all to council, which is that it's really important to uphold longstanding commitments. I also heard, that these should be priorities. I also heard, that this criteria should be taken into consideration, with an appropriate weight, that it's important. And that, also that council should decide in a transparent and open manner, what continue to be longstanding commitments based on today's goals and values. Is that reflective of the whole group?
I think so.
I think so.
Okay, great.
For me,
Great. I heard general support for the method we've gone through so far, and the conversation and process. I heard.
strong general support.
Okay. Thank you.
Can be like a minority voice here. My only feedback would be to like all the boards, like that first February meeting, like I would have loved to participate in that. I just wasn't in town when that happened, because I think that really like set the tone and pace for like this whole process. And so even especially from like a community standpoint, if that's going on like live on ITV, I don't know, maybe like 5 folks that tuned in, but at least, I don't know, I think it says something about like making it more open to, I know it was in the meeting, but just folks that can't be there in person.
Okay.
Other than that, I think the process is great.
Okay, great. And then, I heard safety issues and maintenance are also important criteria that should be paid attention to. Are there disagreements to that? Okay. And that, this is really complex. I heard for the future, ways that we could improve, would be to consider trying to have, maybe some sort of activity with the boards that people can kind of wrap their, minds around it a little bit more. So maybe that is a thought activity, to grade projects yourselves, or to just, sample projects or something around that. Or maybe if there's areas of disagreement in how projects are graded against the criteria, that the community can help resolve those, just for future consideration, for the next time we do this process.
And that'll be in 2 years, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
don't leave out the cemetery board when you put those boards together. Don't leave them out. Something hit me big and strong when I was in that board meeting. Cynthia knows it, that I realized that there was no long-range dollars to put in the central Issaquah plan for future cemetery. And I thought, oh God, did we forget something huge? We did, and I've been screaming about it ever since. I think it's gonna get listened to. All because that poor little cemetery board of only 5 members didn't get included in these cross-section boards. And don't leave it alone.
So,
They have an important function. People are dying to get into there. Just kidding, but it is important. So some boards may carry more weight than other boards, but they're all part of the city. Don't leave them out.
Just talking to yourself. Okay.
okay, so those are my notes of what to include to council. Does that reflect the voice of the group? Did I miss anything?
That sounds good.
Okay, Great, I'll be happy to convey that to council. The next meeting regarding transportation projects is the mobility and infrastructure meeting, which, if memory serves me, is on May 9th. And we'll go from there. Thank you all very much. Appreciate the conversation. I know this is complicated. I know how many attachments were in your packet. I'm trying to sort through all of this stuff. So I really appreciate your questions, your attention, your focus this evening, and all of the feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You guys did a really good job. Thank you for all the work that you've done. And I think these, yeah, there's a lot here and it's really methodical. I really appreciate the methodical way of going about this. So thank you, Deputy City Administrator Snyder. I think I called you something else earlier in the meeting. And Robert, and what, remind us again what your title is? You're
Chief
the
Financial
Chief
Officer.
Financial Officer. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I think I met you in some of the task force meetings, but in a little square. So, yeah.
Yeah, little square. And thanks to Emily too for helping answer some of the project specific questions. I appreciate your help this evening and your support.
So we are just about to wrap up. We don't have any other major business. Do you want to talk, John, about the board work plan?
Yeah, I have several announcements. So
great.
I'll throw up the board work plan so we all see it.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Correct.
So.
Pass the cookies?
we gotta
Absolutely.
pass the cookies. I don't think they're even open
I
yet.
forgot about it. I'm so into our.
How long have you all been staring at the cookies the entire time?
Trying to get access.
So engaged.
Break.
CIP.
Yeah, so the next 3 months look like this. So next month, of May, Thomas is gonna come back and give us an update on, transit study future conditions. And I will be also, providing in this first or second hour, I don't know which way we're gonna go, the formal Metroflex proposal, for the shuttle. No longer calling it shuttle because it actually has a name. So I will be presenting on that next month.
This one.
Yes, very excited about it. And then June, we're gonna do some training. I'll follow up on that in a second. And then July, Thomas is gonna come back and talk to us about light rail planning.
Light,
Light rail planning.
light.
Mhm.
Like the one that's.
We gotta start now. Yeah, gotta start now.
Isn't that in June?
Is the MMP training happening at any point?
Is that the training that can you repeat the question? Sorry.
The mobility master plan,
Yes, I think we're gonna
Previous
include that
relevant documents.
training. Yeah, kind of the whole,
that's in June, that'll be in June.
that'll be in June. Yes.
Cool. Yeah, that's the thing. Because I assume that also includes like OPMA and all that, but we'll do
Yeah.
all of that in one.
Yeah.
Because that's not a whole meeting story.
Yeah, thanks for that question, because I'm also like still wrapping my head around everything that's going on, so I appreciate that. I'm gonna stop sharing, so I'll go to my notes. So, I guess moving on to that's it for the board work plan, if we want to move on.
She's involved in cookies right now.
Yeah, she has a long. I guess moving on to staff report, I don't have any staff report, but I have a lot of announcements, so I'll save it for after the chair report.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was, this is why we didn't do the cookies anymore. I actually don't have a chair report, this time.
Cool. In that case, I will dive into the announcements that we have. First of all, next month, next tab, I think the first agenda item will be our chair and vice chair elections. And grab my notes again. So chair and vice chair roles are up for election as of next month. I wanted to just really quickly roll through the responsibilities of the chair, so you're all aware, because any one of you can run if you so choose for either of the positions. So just in general, the chair's role is to preserve order and decorum, observe and enforce all rules adopted by the commission, open the meetings on time and call them to order, announce them in proper sequence, the business on the agenda, recognizing members who are entitled to the floor, facilitating public comment at appropriate times, stating and putting to a vote all motions that arise during the meeting, halfway there. Protecting the commission from frivolous or delaying motions, enforcing the rules regarding debate and keeping order, expediting business in a way that's compatible with the rights of the members, making a ruling on any points of order that are raised, responding to inquiries of members, and directing others to provide a response related preliminary to parliamentary procedure or certain factual information on current business before the commission, and finally declaring the meeting adjourned. Is that everything? Yeah, anyone can run for that. Yeah, so I'll leave that there. Yes.
Does this come with a gavel? A gavel?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
They call
You
me-
could probably bring one. Next point of business is that 2 new members have been appointed to TAB. Of course, this is Christie's last meeting with us. We have a replacement plus 1 alternate coming forward next month, which is very exciting. Coming back to the training, we know that you all have asked for more training around board rules, processes, MMP, all those things. I will be providing that in June. And I'll also be specifically providing new member training to our 2 new members. So they will be up to speed by next month. And
Point of order,
yes,
would that new member training be open to any of us who'd like to have refresher training who never got new member training?
that will be the purpose of the June meeting, is to sort of fill in those gaps for you. So we'll provide the new members, the new kind of training, and then we'll also provide it to you all at the June tab. Cool.
Good for me.
Yeah. And then the final thing that I forgot to tell you about before the board meeting was that we need to look at a different June date for the tab meeting. The council calendar recognizes the Islamic Feast of Sacrifice, which is that day. So we'll have to figure out a different date to meet for tab and let the clerks know as soon as possible.
What day is it currently set for?
No, 4th Wednesday in the
4th Wednesday.
June, I think. July?
June,
June.
which is, I believe, the 28th. One thing that could be, again, I'm new, so I'm trying to figure this out. The week before that, if we wanted to meet that week, I will be out the 21st to 23rd. So we can either talk about Monday or Tuesday of the 4th week, or assign a different liaison. Yeah, exactly.
So June 28th, right?
Question, I forget if we can do this, but are doodle polls allowed?
Yeah.
Can send out a date.
That would probably be the most efficient way to facilitate that.
I didn't hear it.
A
said.
doodle poll, just I don't know if you're taking a,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
Yes, I will say,
It's obviously the goal is to maximize attendance.
yes. I'm a big fan of doodle polls, so.
Yeah.
And that's all for me.
Great, thank you. We don't have a youth, and unfortunately, we still don't have a youth, because we didn't get a youth applicant.
We'll recruit people to be appointed.
So I think that I think they try to do these in cycles, because otherwise the administration will be spending so much time dealing with this. But I have a feeling, this is purely my guess, if we identified an interested youth, we could probably convince them to make an exemption.
Because how long have we appointed Joseph?
I mean, it's been a year. Yeah, we weren't successful at recruiting a youth. So if you know of someone and don't make any promises because they're not supposed to be appointed out of order just because it makes their life miserable, I presume, but I don't think there's any statutory reason that it can't be done. So And it'd be great to have you.
Yeah.
And so we had one extra person, but the code is really clear that it has to be a youth position, so we had to leave it vacant. Did they say the age though?
Actually don't know
In the
the-
code.
Under 30, you know?
Is there an age thing? I'm kind of just kidding. It's not with the, even if it isn't, that would be the intention. Okay, so anyway, I think we're ready to, do we have any other business or announcements? Well, I will.
I have a question. Are we still doing a thing where we have someone from here show up to the mobility and infrastructure committee?
I was gonna ask that, and then I kind of forgot, but are you interested?
I don't actually know if I'm the best person for this one since I wasn't here for the past two, and this is like a big thing, but I feel like I should be pulling my own weight again since I am here in person now, but maybe for June.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. You know what she's talking about?
Yeah.
Having
Yeah,
one of
I
us attend, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that'd be great.
I did it like one time last fall.
I ended up, as soon as, yeah, I have a commitment on that second Tuesday of the month, and so I can't do it. But I think it's a great opportunity for other people to do it, so, will you help me remember that she's volunteered to do it in June? Okay. I don't know if there'll be a matter in front of them that's relevant, and I think maybe, when she left here, I thought she did a good job capturing, I'm not sure. Andrea did a good job capturing our feedback, and I didn't feel that there was gonna be a lot of insight that we could provide if we were there, but I would say if anybody wants to attend that meeting, I think, when they bring it to, on May 9th, when they bring this to M and I just didn't feel like we didn't have a lot of controversy that they're gonna want a deeper understanding of, so I stopped short of calling for someone for that, but if anybody wants to go, I think they should.
I think, yeah, June is gonna be me, I think, among other topics, but.
Okay.
That'd be great.
That was under other business and.
Madam Chair,
Oh, yeah.
I have a trivia question.
Oh, okay.
Youth member, at the time of appointment, this is our issue, needs to be at least 15, but not yet 18.
Oh, serious? Oh,
So we have a really.
Oh, that's scary
I
now.
think in part was the thought process, a few different things about that, the hours of the meetings, the time of day, also getting someone that might have a little bit more experience with different modes of travel. So, and then that get graduated or adult.
It's great to have high school kids, and we had a whole bunch of them when we first formed the tab. When the council first formed the tab, when tab was new, we had a bunch of them.
Is that for lack of letting the high schools know about it? I mean,
I was gonna say,
or is it you kids
so we
just?
establish an outreach program?
Let's talk about that. Is it appropriate for us to talk about that offline in our next chair, vice chair, or whatever?
we can.
Yeah, I think that, pardon?
I don't think the whole board needs to be part of that.
That's what I'm saying. Let's, yeah. I think it's a correct, I mean, anyone's welcome, but yeah, I agree with Mike. Let's take that offline. But I would never want to exclude anyone, but yeah, I think most people feel like he does, so I'm assuming people, yeah. Okay, I think with that, we are adjourned. Right, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good discussion, everyone.
Was this ready to go?
No.